Wow.
Also our fellow
This is our camera crew.
Hi, how are you?
So he's going to video you, and you can have whatever you want to say, and we'll sort of. Oh, we've got a really large Facebook, and we're part of an international group of human rights people all around the world. So, what's going on in your country is similar to a thing called eugenics, which we're fighting in New Zealand actually with Oranga Tamariki. It's the same kind of policies. It's basically the government setting laws to hurt the people. Well, so we're going to do this in an interview, huh?
Sure, why not?
Okay, human rights and anything that hurts families or children. And we know that being a human rights defender is a pretty thankless task, even in this country, where human rights don't really are not properly formed, particularly with the way that our Bill of Rights is set up. And so, what's your view on the situation with these people in China?
Well, I mean, you know, today's agenda, I think, is fucked up because, you know, we've got the genocide debate in relation to the Uyghur population and some of the problems in China. And, you know, that whole issue of whether Parliament should debate it, I think Parliament should.
Absolutely.
Sure. Should have done this long ago, but my argument would be that if you're going to debate the Uyghur issue, you should be also thinking about whether in fact there's a good case to be made for genocide in the case of Falun Gong practitioners, because for 22 years Chinese Communist Party has done its best to basically stamp out the spiritual correlation practice.
Absolutely.
It has, and it's worked very hard. I mean, you know, you look at the various forms of persecution which it's engaged in. You've got unlawful arrest, you've got illegal detention, you've got physical torture, you've got brainwashing, you've got psychiatric torture. You're trying to force practitioners to abandon their faith. You've got involuntary live organ harvesting of the vital organs, which obviously leads to their death.
Which you're talking about even worse eugenics than the Nazis put in place. And that's actually, you know, that was a very similar thing. Anybody who wanted to speak up against the government in Germany were exterminated under lawful practices, and that's kind of what's going on in Germany. In China.
Well, I think, you know, the organ harvesting also, obviously that's being inflicted upon Uyghurs as well. In fact, any prisoner of conscience, I suppose, is if they refuse to transform. By transform, what I mean is that they abandon their religious belief or political belief, and they toe the Chinese Communist Party line. And so, my view is that, well, you know, if the intention is of the party to destroy a group by either persecuting every member of the group or through instilling fear of persecution or in practice as a faith, the group effectively ceases to exist. So there's an argument then that genocide is being committed against Falun Gong practitioners in China.
Well, you only need, of the 6 points to commit genocide under the United Nations, you only need 4 of them. And, you know, we as Families for Justice, we fight Oranga Tamariki in the family court, which, you know, with the recent decision in the Waitangi Tribunal, you know, you'd have to ask you the question whether genocide hasn't been committed against our own people by the way that Oranga Tamariki have acted. And so we're here in support today of, you know, the people at Falun Gong and you know, I mean, there's no doubt that our government has to do something. Or at least, you know, if we're an open and honest democracy, we've got no point to say that the things that are going on in northern China are just not right.
Well, I think, you know, what's happening in Xinjiang is just one example. I mean, CCP persecutes groups across the whole country. I mean, I've mentioned Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, but there's house church Christians as well. Then you have the persecution of the Tibetan community. Tibet is effectively closed off. It's very hard to know exactly what's happening there. And then you have persecution of Chinese human rights lawyers as well. Then you have persecution of petitioners. These are ordinary Chinese people who may have had, say, land confiscated and they've never been compensated, or properties demolished and they've never been compensated for that. They go to Beijing to peacefully appeal for some form of compensation, and then they're persecuted in the government. They're sent back to the provinces from which they come, and they're persecuted there to make sure they don't go back to Beijing.
Well, it's really clear that the judicial system is not independent of the state.
No, it's not.
Right. And that's what we're complaining about in New Zealand, and there's a big billboard sitting only 300 metres, an electronic billboard in Greenlane here, which is complaining about the Judicial Complaints Commissioner's Office, where there were 3,551 complaints, and none of them have been upheld. So New Zealand has to be very careful with the creep as well.
Well, I think it does, and I think, you know, if the government here, you know, our government's wanting to say that it cares deeply for things like fundamental human rights and freedoms and civil liberties and the rule of law, then, you know, it has to actually put its money where its mouth is.
Oh, but New Zealanders are waking up to the fact that that's not true.
Yeah, and see, that's the interesting thing. The climate's different now because, as I've shared with some people, for about 20 years, the Chinese Communist Party's soft power campaign was working rather well. And people, you know, were interested in believing, or did believe that, yes, the party is our new best friend. But this is a headline that we saw in the Herald in 2008 after we signed the preferential free trade agreement. Our new best friend, exclamation mark. You could not run that headline now because nobody's going to buy that line.
Well, they lied. They said they weren't going to sign it.
We've seen,
and then they signed it as soon as they were in power.
Well, we've seen too much from the Chinese Communist Party over the last 12 months or more with this wolf warrior diplomacy. We've seen what it's doing to Australia. We've seen what it's done in Hong Kong. We've seen its increased hostility towards Taiwan. And then there was that border conflict with India. It's become increasingly critical of the EU.
Well, then they wanted to take over Vladivostok.
Well, you know,
and Putin wasn't very impressed with that either. And the highest concentration of military naval warfare at the present time is in the South China Sea.
Well, yes, and so
And people don't realise, when we talk about the highest concentration of naval warfare, we're talking about aircraft carriers, we're talking about frigates, we're talking about destroyers, and we're talking about submarines. Forget the Gulf. 2/3 of the world's trade goes through the South China Sea. It's all over trade.
And so that's why now it's increasingly hard for the government here to sell that image because actually increasing numbers of people see through it. They no longer believe that the party actually is our best friend or our friend. Quite the contrary. It's a real problem.
It's creep.
So what we want to see...
We've got national ministers that allegedly took money
from
overseas Chinese parties.
Well, here's a chance for, and it's a shame that it took 21 years for a Minister of Foreign Affairs to advise our exporters that we shouldn't have our eggs in one basket, and that we need to diversify our export markets. That's something we should have been doing a long, long time ago.
Show me the money. Show me the money, and I'll show you the corruption.
Well, you see, the thing is, let's wait and see what happens today, and let's hope that this thing is debated in Parliament. The Uyghurs need it, Falun Gong practitioners need it, house church Christians need it, Tibetan Buddhists need it, Sveti, we persecuted group in China, need to. So I'm hoping that the New Zealand government's going to do something principled and courageous.
Come on, we've got the National Party, which the ex-Prime Minister, who was the chairman of Mainzeal, which collapsed for 200 million, is the chair of one of the largest Chinese banks for New Zealand. So how do you think National's going to vote?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I don't know how they're going to vote, but I think that...
Show me the money.
Well, you know, I'd like to think it's not that case. I'd like to think that because...
Sadly, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I don't believe that.
I'd like to think that some people are going to. Their moral conscience will cause them to vote in the right way.
Sadly, in New Zealand, the whips control the party.
Yes, no,
and they're going to be told to vote exactly what they've been told to vote. Look, we had Andrew Little in the family court that was going to bring in human rights as a basis for the family court. Nothing happened.
Well, if the New Zealand government, if the Parliament doesn't actually make the right decision today, I think it's going to actually cause our government to really in the eyes of our Five Eyes partners, the rest of the world. It can only damage our credibility. I think that they're becoming increasingly aware that they've got to speak up more than they have been. They're aware of it.
I think on a global view, New Zealand's just becoming more and more irrelevant.
I don't know. I think
we're only a small country. We can't even carry our own military.
Well, it's actually interesting that we've attracted a lot of attention and interest from media from Australia and the UK regarding what the Minister of Foreign Affairs said recently concerning our relationship with Five Eyes partner countries. Now, I do get the sense that the government here is aware of that, they're sensitive to it, and they've been forced to respond. I'm hoping that that's going to continue. That's what I'm really looking forward to. When I see critical articles in the Times, I think that's great.
Yeah,
it's
I
great.
saw it.
It's a wonderful thing to see. And that's forcing our politicians here to respond. That's what we want to see.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Picture of that.
Can we speak to the consulate? About this protest here. We're going to get nowhere here, guys.
It's very open and transparent.
Right. So that's eugenics. Well, you know, people don't realise that New Zealand has the same problems over in the country. There's all sorts of But even countries like New Zealand, we don't really have human rights here. We have bits and pieces of our Declaration of Human Rights, but it's just like sort of a paperwork. Because, you know, you go to court and you try and defend your rights under human rights, you just forget it. So we're no better than China.
You know, have you heard about the life organ harvest?
Yeah.
You know, Communist Party, they
We're the largest exporter of organs in the world.
increased 300 times the the transplantation, you know, center, and they increased 300 times after they started this exercise.
Great business.
Yeah, so it's a
Genocide.
Yeah,
It's barbaric.
yeah.
It shouldn't. But what governments around the world should be doing is saying, we won't buy them.
Exactly.
But the elites in all the countries who've got money say we need them.
So what we should do? What do you want to say?
Just out the gate. So we understand of our own state. We're not just coming to rob you know, you're a small country. There's all sorts of individuals actually live in state here. There's nothing to do. We don't
About that's their rear entrance to their
compound.
to their embassy.
It is a fucking compound, isn't it?
But then you come up here and guess look what
There's more cameras there on that.
Yeah,
Fucking
but
hell.
look at this one they've sneakily put up.
Like a people mover with a souped up engine.
The
Even though they're
fuck?
police intelligence.
Season practicality.